Greetings, Marsh here, and welcome to episode 327 of my modded Factorio playthrough. In this episode, we are going to have a discussion on how to build a setup that uses beacons, and then we are going to make and test our uranium processing setup. Enjoy! I am thinking this would be a good opportunity to show how beacons work, plus, based on the size of that setup, when you see numbers in the hundreds, it's even to me. I'm like, maybe it should have beacons. But I still want to avoid using them, but I know a lot of people would like to see a build that uses them and how I would calculate it. So let's do that. But calculating a beacon build is a very physical thing. Like, calculating the numbers exactly, you actually have to have the build in front of you, which is kind of why, at least one reason why I don't like to use them, because I would rather just calculate the numbers and just place them and have it work. But when it comes to beacons, you kind of need to build the setup first, and then you'll know how many beacons you'll need, and then you'll know how big the setup needs to be. So it's kind of backwards. But for a very large setup where you know you're going to build the same thing a bunch of different times, then beacons work. But when you're building like a small number of machines, using helmod to calculate beacons is kind of overkill, where the end result is just put as many beacons on one machine as possible and don't even calculate it, which, I don't know, seems kind of weird gameplay to me. But I did spend the time smushing all these together, so now the setup has been upgraded. But I don't think we're making the centrifuges yet. Yeah, they're right here, so we have them unlocked, but I'm guessing if we made a request for them, we would not get them. Oh, they stack in 50? That's kind of nice. Yeah, it's red. So we need to make them. But it'll be as simple as placing some machines down here. And this is going to be direct inserted, so we can just go straight through there. And it's set to 10, which is probably not going to be enough if we're going to build a bunch of these, but we're probably also not going to need them very soon, so it should be fine. So we should be making both types now, hopefully. Seems like it, but I might have had these set wrong, because they're like being picked up and sent somewhere. Oh, it's giving them to me, because of course it would. That is exactly where we'd want them, because I made a request for them. Okay, well, the other thing that we would need are the beacons, and we do have 2 tiers of beacons, where the better beacons cover more area and hold more modules. So let's do another direct inserted setup. And it's going to require something new here. The harmonic splinters. We have them in the factory, but actually getting them here might be kind of annoying. And this will require the shards. And of course, the other beacons, but we don't need to request those. So there's a couple ways of doing this, but because we're not making very many of these beacons, or I anticipate we won't be making very many, instead of sending drones or something like that down here, we can just let robots do it, where we can just have some chests in here. And now the robots are going to come here and grab these. But one thing we also need to do is figure out exactly how big this build would be. And the centrifuges are small, so it's not as much to worry about there. The recipe is the enrichment process that we want. It has the input and output for fluids, but we don't need anything like that. And of course they get productivities, where, let's say the input belt's on the left, so long-handed there, and this won't be a sorted belt or anything, even though the input belt will be sorted, the output will not. And we probably can just put power poles in the middle here. It looks like they're going to reach the whole way. Something like that. So we have kind of our pattern here. So to calculate the number of beacons, we need to at least place those down. And how are we doing here? Do we finally have beacons yet? Nope, it needs concrete. Ah, we need to have the buffer chests on there. Kind of want to take this inserter away for a second. There we go, so I can grab one of these to show the range. And they have 2 module slots. And we've got a tier 2 here that you see has a much larger range. and 4 slots, so even more powerful. Because of course. So then you would just place these down, and you want to do it with an eye of having the exact same number of machines affected by the same number of these. So if we put it right here and kept going down, each one of these would affect 5 machines on each side. So 5 on this side and then 5 on there as well. And the power poles would reach. But would it be better if we offset them a little bit like this? Would this help? Well, if we did it like this, this one would cover 6. This one would technically cover 6 because there would be another one down there. This one covers 6 as well. So we kind of have an idea there. So let's take this, plop it on the other side to get an idea for what we'd be dealing with. So these ones on the end, in order to make it consistent, you would want to make sure each machine has their consistent number of effect sources. And we can hover over these to see what their speed would be. But I suppose we also need to put the modules in as well to actually see what it would be. So we'll put them in. And the graphic is kind of cool where it shows you the extra modules and also the tier of them. So it is set properly for Bobs and Angels, which is pretty cool. So we can hover over these to see that these ones in the middle have effect sources of 10, but then right here, this one is a 9 because it doesn't have this one here. So basically you would want to put as many of these on here as you would need in order for each machine to have a consistent number of sources. So you can see even this one right here needs one more. So it would have to be right there. And you can see it does affect it. So 10, 10, 10, and then 9 and 8. So you get the idea that if you built a setup at the very ends of the setup, you would have to have more of these sticking on the end if you wanted it to be perfect, where each one of these was all exactly the same. If it was a really large setup, it probably wouldn't make that much a difference. And you can just maybe cut those ones off. And the average is still mostly 10. So we have an idea of the setup here, but to actually calculate in helmod using the beacon planner, we need to know how many beacons are affecting a single machine. So like, let's just pick this one right here, and we can see the outline right here for which beacon affects it, where this one does, this one, this one, this one, this one, and then this one. And certainly if there was one down here, it would not have the reach to hit that. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then we have these numbers here. The number on the top, amount affecting 1, is how fast the machines will get because of their beacons. The ones on the bottom are how many beacons are there. The only purpose of this is for calculating how many beacons you need and how much power the setup would need. So first, let's put the speed modules in, and it kind of clicks back there, but probably the speed modules are the ones we'd want, so let's make that the default. And look what it did. So of course we required less machines, but also it tells us how many beacons we need, and it has these numbers, the times 05 and plus 3. Well, the plus 3 on the bottom is just how many extra beacons do you want. So if we took away these 3, the number goes down by 3 and now it's 14. Let's say we wanted another 10. You put 10 in there and now it's 24. So what you would do with this, if you cared, is if you had any extra ones that were like on the end like this, you can count all of those up and then add them in to those extra beacons here on the constant beacon. Because take a look at the number of centrifuges that we need. If we take away those beacons, it doesn't actually change the number of centrifuges. So doing this is only for planning purposes in figuring out how many beacons you need. Because certainly if we put 10 beacons on here, power consumption increases. So it's for calculating power consumption and also just figuring out, okay, how much stuff do I need for this setup? So for our purposes, we can just kind of leave it at 0. And then this one, beacon by factory, and it's kind of, I'm guessing, a translation error. But if you remember up here when we compute by element and we can also compute by factory, computing by factory just says how many machines do you want. So consider factory just assembling machines or whatever it is that you're trying to calculate. Of course, now I messed it up because it wasn't linked. So we have to do the 10.68 to get it back. So when it says beacon by factory 0.5, it's giving us half of the number of beacons that we have machines. So if we do 1 beacon per factory, now we have the same amount. And we can use this to try to roughly calculate how big this would be. And if you look at this setup, it's not quite lined up, so it's not going to be perfect. But the general idea is there are half as many beacons as there are centrifuges, because there's a centrifuge on each side of every beacon, roughly. So that 0.5 was actually pretty accurate. So we're already much smaller than the 400 or 500 that we were looking at. And the last one here, the money setting, is amount affecting 1, or in other words, how many beacons are affecting any given machine. So if we do 0, we're back where we started, and also it tells us we need 237 beacons because it's just giving us half of that number. And I have noticed if you say 1, it like doesn't work. I guess you would never use 1 beacon on something. But then if you use 2, suddenly it seems to connect. So I'm not really sure why 1 doesn't work. But for this, we want to use the calculation we did where we checked to see how many affected, let's say this one. And it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that means we need to put a 6 in there, amount affecting 1. And now we're down to 18. 18 centrifuges and just 9.13 beacons. So in fact, this is very useful in the sense that it's telling us we're going to need nothing to do this. And it's kind of excessive in the sense that we're going to need nothing to do this. So we could have just spammed beacons and said, okay, we're done. Which is kind of another reason why I don't like to use beacons, because they just seem super overpowered. Although I've noticed we didn't even have beacon 2 selected. We were running on beacon 1. So if we hit beacon 2, and let's just make that the default, keep switching back for helmod reasons, we can throw more speed modules in. And now we're down to 8.48 machines and 7.24 beacons. So beacons are good. I'm almost in a way kind of giddy because I don't often use beacons. So then when I actually see what they can do, I'm like, oh my God, that's crazy. But I know people wanted to see a beacon build and how you would calculate it. If you were in vanilla Factorio or some similar mod where you didn't have these super powerful beacons that can hold many modules and had this huge range, these numbers would be a lot smaller. But it's just because we're approaching late games Angel Bobs where things just get bonkers. They just get crazy bonkers. And we could actually test our math by trying to build this, because I'm sure that if we used rate calculator, it would tell us where these ones right here would have our output of 0.105 of the plutonium. So if we check these, 7.28. So we can check our math by just making this build and seeing if it works. And I was thinking this would be a lot bigger than this, but nope. It's just going to be this. And in fact, there's too many machines here. So this machine right here should be affected by 6 beacons. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And it is. So we're standing right here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that is good. And in fact, we could probably give helmod the perfect number because we have 11 beacons. So if we came in here, and it looks like it did constant beacon for us because we reset it, we'd want to have a total of 11 of them. So we need a lot more than 3. Looks like it would be 7 extra ones here. So first, we can check the output of this by selecting everything. And it looks like this didn't link properly. And this is a little confusing because the ingredient and the output is plutonium. So looking at this is not going to tell us the correct number. That the correct number is 7.12. That's what we're looking for. And if we select all of this, it looks like it's telling us basically double. Oh, I see. By switching this, it also changed the amount affecting one number as well. So we actually want this to be 6 again, which makes the number even smaller. We actually only need 6 machines. The setup is shrinking. It's like the bare minimum size here. So we need that one, but not those. So we have a setup there. Let's check to see what our output is. 7.74. Helmod thinks it's 7.12, but we're getting kind of close. And we have a total of 8 beacons. So let's make this number a little smaller. It doesn't really change the output, but I would say we're reasonably close here, where the output is 7.74 and the input is 11.61. And this one, it says it's 10.68. So that could be an error in either rate calculator or helmod. I couldn't really tell you. It's also why I don't like beacons, is because they're so messy in a way, because it's basically just spam the beacons and see what happens is how you do beacons in Factorio. But yeah, that's basically what we'd be looking at. This cute little setup here would replace 500 machines by the use of a couple of beacons. Another reason why I don't like to use them is because a lot of setups end up being very organic in shape, like these. Imagine how much longer it would have taken me to build all this stuff if I had a whole extra step of, let's see how many beacons we can stack into here. It would probably double the amount of time it would take to build these setups. And I don't think you'd want to watch the episodes if they took twice as long to do the exact same thing. And also, I think it's less valuable because what happens when you get a better technology type, you'll just want to replace the machines anyway, and then you'll have to do the beacons all over again. So beacons are very much like an end game thing where you don't expect to be dealing with them very much. Like once you place them down, they're done. So that's our beacon setup. It's almost so small where part of me is actually tempted to just make the big one without the beacons to begin with, because this just feels so overpowered to me. Oh my goodness. But at the same time, I kind of want to test it, so at least you can see how something would work. So I'm going to have to think on that, on if I'm actually going to want to build something this tiny or just go big like I have before, because it just seems so broken that a couple of machines and suddenly the game is trivialized. And we don't even have maximum level modules or beacons yet. We can get the next tier of beacon, and you see that these beacons are basically 2 squares away of being able to reach the next line of centrifuges. So if we did get beacon 3s, these in the middle would not only affect these guys, but also the ones here and the ones here as well. It would just be crazy. But anyway, that's how you do beacons. I hope I explained the process in helmod pretty well. But you can see, based on the amount of work that it takes, that it's a lot of extra work, and I think it's almost faster to just make the setups bigger. Because we have robots now. The robots build everything. We're not building things. We're not placing things anymore. The robots do it. So I feel like we don't really need to spend that much time on something like that. But nonetheless, that's for a later process, because we actually need to generate some plutonium to even get that started. And you can see the rest of these setups here do not require anywhere near as many machines. The biggest one would be the standard uranium processing. And since that's the first step, we might as well get to it. And I'm not going to use beacons for this one. I am kind of curious how big the setup would be, just to see if 500 would even be a particularly large number, because it might not be. But let's just take an open space here. Don't really need to worry about how big it is, because we're just doing the normal processing. It gets the productivities, and we're probably going to have several rows of these to the point where yellows are fine. So I'm going to use yellows for now, and then we'll figure out how many rows we have. And in fact, we might want to just do 4 rows, because then that would be 15 times 4 and give us our perfect amount of input. But we would have this. We would have these machines on the other side as well. Let's say the input is on the left. So I'm sure a yellow inserter would be fine for this. And then we'll just output everything onto the output belt. And because we have a space in the middle, it means that we can use these power poles. And I think if we space them like this, it would work pretty well. Oop, they don't quite reach. And I think this would actually be the repeatable pattern because there would be that gap right there. Although it looks like it would actually need to be a 2 gap because there's 2 gaps between here. So the actual pattern would have an extra one on there and the power can't reach there, so to make it easier to actually place, let's put the extra one down there. And there we go. This should be a nice pattern we can use, and it is. And we can also stack them right next to each other like this. So why not? Let's see if doing it like this would work. So how many in total is all of that? 36. So it might actually be a pretty large setup if it only had 3 rows, but nonetheless, let's see what happens to it. We'd be looking like this now, which would be 72, which would mean we would more or less need another one of these. So it would look like that, and that would be 160 machines. So in the scale of the factory, something that looks like that, these 2, is nothing compared to things that we did previously. And it is a little large, though, compared to this. And in fact, it's too large to place here, so that is a reason to want to do things differently. But if we put them in line, they would fit just fine, even in this spot. They just wouldn't work well side by side, and it technically would squeeze into some of these, but compared to many of our setups, this is not really any bigger or smaller than most things. The most obnoxious setup is the silicon nitride right here, and with faster machines and just putting speed modules in there instead of productivities, that would become much smaller, which might be the solution. Or maybe putting in the beacons. Just kidding. Probably not, based on how powerful our little test was. I'm thinking right here. Okay, we can just pick these up, but at the same time, might as well make a blueprint out of it just to make sure it doesn't get lost or anything. And we can pick all that up. And let's go down here and move that lime setup. So this setup here is just producing lime, which is going into glass, and it's just a water thing. It does need the viscous mud water from somewhere, but it could come from anywhere, really. So this does not actually have to be here. When we put this here, I think all of this was basically empty, so it wasn't really blocking anything. Well, we've placed all our concrete, so we don't need that anymore. So let's just pick the thing up so we have it saved, so we can just move it later or upgrade it, but we'll have to see. We might change our glass output, which would require this to be changed. And I'll just remove all of the connecting bits to this since it's not going to be here anymore, so we don't need any of this, and we don't need the mud water either, at least to here. I suppose if I leave a squiggly, it'll be obvious that something's there, so sooner or later I'll see it. And now we have our uranium set up. We'll probably want to try to line it up with other machines here, which seems to be like right here. And let's just kind of put it like right there. And we probably don't need our logistics anymore for the centrifuges, so we can just get rid of them. Oh yeah, that thing created mud too, which we also don't need. Man, this is messy right here. Or I guess it looks messy now that the things they were trying to avoid are gone. Okay, and these belts are probably the wrong way, but whatever, we'll get it worked out here. We don't need this line belt here either. I guess I'll just remove the whole thing, short of where it actually goes in. And then we'll figure it out. Like, all this stuff is going to move when we switch everything to the better quality coils that use coolant. Okay, well, we needed our 160, so we'll place our pattern again. And looks like something is a little bit in the way. And we'll let robots place them. But nonetheless, we can figure out how many are actually here. 144. Let's take one more group. And this should be the correct one, because it's got the gap. And now how many do we have? 180. And since it's so close to 160, we'll just make it 160, so we need to remove 20 of them, which is basically right there to make it nice and square. We need to get these belts lined up. The input belts were on the left. Although by doing this vertically, the yellow belts aren't quite enough anymore, because that would only be a total of 45, and we need 60, so we are going to use the red ones here. And then the output would have to go somewhere, and when you think of where to put it, we might as well just put it on our ingot bus. It's not really an ingot, but we can't really process the rest of the ore here, especially if I go with that big 500 setup, which would basically be 3 times this. It wouldn't really fit. It would have to be out here, and in fact, it could be like up here somewhere. But luckily, that part can wait, because that is a result of processing all the uranium-238 away. And that's not necessarily something we want to do yet, because the 238 could function as ammo for us. So we don't really want to get going on that quite yet. Not to mention that in order to do it, we need to have some plutonium to start the process. So there's really no point in building that setup quite yet. To get this going in the beginning, we just need to process the 234s and the 235s into fuel. So that means stuff goes up. And it can be a yellow because it dramatically reduces the number of resources. And we're still kind of waiting on machines, but they will get here eventually. We do need our sorting warehouse like everything else gets. So let's put it like right there. And then we just need to get the uranium up here. And to make it look nice and clean like we did with these other things, we're going to have to move a bunch of belts, but too late, not doing that anymore, so we're just going to place it, and then when we actually connect this, it's going to fire up. So I kind of don't want to do that quite yet, because I want to see how it works. But nonetheless, I don't think it's really ever run significantly before, so we don't actually know. So let's cut those off right there. So for the few moments that this is going to run, we can hook it up and see what happens. First, the ideal method runs, which it absolutely can because so little creates this. It's only up 4,000, and it's not that we're low, it's just there's not many methods that make it, so the number doesn't have to be very high. And it runs and makes our uranium. Not much to see. It seems to be working. That's usually pretty good. I know sometimes it can be kind of boring, but when everything just kind of works, that's what you want to see. You don't want disasters. You want everything just to work. So what about all of this? What are we going to do with the output resources here? Well, we're probably going to want to have a uranium warehouse in here because we don't want to send any 238 away until we have enough that we can make the fuel cells, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to make them. So, and based on our setup here, the plutonium is only coming from 238 or from processing the fuel cells from neptunium. So what this means is all of this stuff that we get can be immediately turned into fuel cells right here and now without any logic connected to it. And it looks like we are short on lights, so there we go. And all the machines aren't quite here yet, so we wouldn't want to get started quite yet. But we would have our warehouse to hold everything. And that missing robot zone is triggering me, so let's get that fixed real quick. There you go. We would have our input. And then what happens from here kind of depends. That's so close to 1, I kind of just want to use 1, especially because later on we're going to have like faster machines and speed modules and probably be able to make this work with 1. So I'm thinking we'll be fine. But then again, I don't know, it might seem like it's not running very well if we don't fully utilize it, so let's just try to do that. I guess, like, I don't know, put them right here, I suppose. And the input to this is going to be very slow, but we can do something kind of funny here where one of these outputs will be 238 The other will be, in this case, 234. So they will just output, and then they can be on the same belt. And then we probably want to move those machines over a little bit when they finally get here. But there would be inputs, there would be outputs, and then I suppose a passive provider chest here. This isn't necessarily an anywhere but here situation. Well, of course I don't pick up the inserters, because we don't want this running forever if we don't actually need the fuel for anything at the current time. But we probably should make them buffers just in case, for whatever reason, the fuel cells do find themselves in our inventory, that they will actually have somewhere to go. And how many of each to make? Well, actually, in the case of 238, we want to process all of it, because it is the ideal fuel. So we probably don't really want to have any limiter on here at all, because the limiting factor here is going to be our ability to create it. And as long as either one or the other is limited, then we don't need to limit both. Let's put that there. Wow, the wire reach is crazy. Just top tier stuff is just really good. It's not even the top tier, it's the second top tier. There's one even higher than that. Alright, let's do the same thing on this side for symmetry. Make that the 235. Then that one will go up, and will honestly be a similar machine to this. Like right there. Except we want it to be the 235 cells, and we absolutely want a limiter on this, because this is the thing that we're going to create a bunch of. So this makes sense to limit, and let's just say, and of course that's the wrong thing, we want the fuel cell. It's not like we're going to need that many of them, so it's not going to take very long to fill this up. So how about let's just say 100. I don't think it's going to take the bots very long to deliver these, and nuclear fuel is used rather slowly in the scheme of things. So let's try 100 for now. Or we could deliver it by drones too and just do it completely differently, but this should work pretty well. And then we will have one more output here, because both of these are going to use all of our factories, 234 and 235. The only question is what happens to the 238. And we definitely want to have a supply in here before we start doing things with it. So how about, let's say, we have to hold on to it until we have more than 1,000. And then once we do, it can go to the bus. Wherever that slot would end up being. We'd have to figure it out. The bus is actually kind of cramped as is, but when it gets to the end, to the point to where we're processing it into plutonium, then we can decide there. Oh, there's some extra inserters. What happens to it? Some lights for vision. And I think that's everything for our initial processing of uranium here. So let's see how it works. So it's getting metered in and everything's starting up, and it looks a little slow in the beginning, but it's just because these machines hold a lot. And it looks like didn't quite put the inserters in here correctly. So let's fix those. Seems good, and I guess we can use rate calculator to make sure our math was right. Where we select all of this, and yeah, it's about 60. And there we go. Starting to get our not glowing green rocks. In fact, this setup might even stop before anything even happens because we have too many of the green rocks. But first thing is they're being metered out to make the fuel cells. And I suppose actually we also need to deliver the iron as well, so we do need to do that once all of this catches up. I kind of want to see the first one. Whoop, there we go. Is that the first one? Is that a 235 or a 234? I think it's a 35. I mean, statistically, it would be. So let's see what happens to it. There it goes. And this warehouse is big, so it will run for as long as it can. And actually, we kind of don't want it to run because it would completely fill up on 238 when we may not want it to. So I'm not really sure what the limit should be, but it probably should have one. And since we're not limiting it on 234, how about let's instead limit it to 235? And let's just say, how about less than 100 for now? So all this is going. We haven't gotten a 234 yet, but they're quite rare, so we won't. But otherwise it's going. That's going at full blast. That seems like it's going a lot less than full blast. Why is that? I thought we had 60. Maybe we don't. Maybe it's a lot less than 60. It's actually 30. Well, we have a couple options here. Of course, we can use speed modules. We could make it bigger. But honestly, 30 would probably be fine. I was just going with 2 belts because that's what we did with everything. But not everything here actually comes out at that rate. And we probably don't want to be doing this because it's going to be making uranium in the inefficient way. So, knowing that, for now, just to remind myself that it's done, let's just unhook it right there. And they took the uranium away. That should allow this setup to catch up eventually, but I kind of want it to catch up right now because we're producing a lot of extra resources. Of course, this changes our numbers, where we would want 30 now. And we're back down to the 1.84 of the uranium reactors for the 234. But nonetheless, we probably should just build 4 of them for the day when we decide to upgrade this setup. And even with 30 a second, we're still going to get 3.8 megawatts. That number, though, is a lot lower because you can see we're now consuming 2.2, although we are charging accumulators. But still, that's only like 500 of it, so we would be at 1.7. So it stands to reason that we would actually max out 30 a second before too long. So we may have to upgrade this, you know, add more modules, or even add another line on the end if that's what it comes down to. But it looks like we caught up again. So now by doing this, the number should basically stay the same. It seems really weird like we're producing nothing because these are 2 blue belts and only 30 resources, but it seems fine. And uranium ore was brought to the junk warehouse, which means there is a missing box right here where this needs to be set to the uranium. And now it's being requested, so it will get placed back into the system. Alright, well then this setup's going to be a little sad if it's only running at half speed, but oh well. I'm still glad we built it because I'm thinking we're going to need the whole thing. I was really attached to 60 because that seemed like an appropriate number for what our factory would need. Wow, it put 398 238s in there, but still don't have a 234. But we do need to get that iron, and I'm pretty sure that iron coils are on a drone somewhere. So probably the fastest way to do this is just to deliver some iron coils by drone. So we might have to wait this out, but at the same time we can always just toss some iron on the belt so the process will start. And this does make things a little less symmetrical, but how about we do that? Oh, and we do need to actually have the plate chopper in here. There we go. Let's just throw my stack of iron plates in there to get this seated. Man, it uses so much. Yeah, 100 iron plates because that recipe is so large. So I think this means we actually need the coils themselves. Luckily though, the drones are real fast now on their nice roads. Although that wasn't the drone we were looking for. And there it is. Still haven't gotten a 234. Although this recipe is set wrong. Inventory full, which means junk everywhere. But, there we go. Oh yeah, we can't put the productivities in there. They have to be speeds. And it runs so slow that we can just put these in here. Okay. Iron's finally here. Guess we could put the productivities in there if it really matters. Kind of. Seems like this machine is pretty fast. Do these actually need a better belt than that? No. They're just filling up. Anyway, there we go. Making fuel cells. Juicy power. And it looks like we are filled up already. We've got our 100 fuel cells. That's maxed out. The machine itself is maxed out. The belts will almost be maxed out. And then once it gets 100 in here, it is going to stop. And luckily, we don't really need to produce very much of it very quickly because we already have this set up to run at maximum power. So the second we turn it on, statistically, it will be able to fire these 2 reactors to give us a total of about 4.1 megawatts. But we are using the neighbor bonus of 2 on here. So in this case, for efficiency, we probably want to design it around 2 reactors. And there it is, the jumping window again. We probably want to design this around 2 reactors and just have it basically be half of a setup and then make the other half of the setup when we upgrade this to a faster speed. So from here, the next thing we need to do is figure out one of our reactor setups because it's probably going to have 4 reactors, but we're going to need several of these to pump out all of those gigawatts. But that's going to have to wait until the next episode. Thanks for watching, and I will see you later.